Hello, everyone. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about a project we're doing with NIST. We're developing metrics for privacy-preserving federated learning. So, as she mentioned, I'm from the Census Bureau. I work on a small team called XD. We do new and emerging technologies, testing proofs of concept for improving how the Census Bureau conducts government services. So today, I'll give an outline of this project we're doing with NIST, an overview of the data we're using and the privacy protections we have for genomic data. I'll talk about the project architecture and then some red teaming we're conducting in a challenge format to get user input and some crowdsourcing input on how well these metrics can actually protect privacy. And then I'll talk about our future goals for this work at the end. So first, what is the outline of this project? Well, it's a multi-agency effort to explore PPFL. So our partners are NIST, that's our main government partner, and specifically two organizations within NIST, so their Privacy Engineering Program and their National Center of Cybersecurity Excellence. So the NCCOE is conducting a lot of work right now on genomic and genetic data, especially around privacy and cybersecurity. And then we're working with MITRE and Nexus, which are some private sector research groups that are giving us some extra boost in data science, security, privacy expertise. So what is the outline of this project? Well, we know that sharing medical data across borders and between institutions is a difficult challenge. And one possible solution to that is privacy-preserving federated learning, or PPFL. And we want to know, is there a way that we can create PPFL-generated models and validate the metrics on privacy preservation with those? And as I mentioned before, we're using genomic data for this project. And if you're not familiar with genomic data, like I was at the start of this program, it is basically the rule book for an organism. It's the collection and characterization of all of that organism's genes and how those genes impact the qualities of that organism, different characteristics, behaviors, et cetera. You can imagine that with genomic or genetic data, there are a lot of privacy concerns. And this chart here shows just a map of some of the different privacy attacks that can be done with genomic data. The paper that I pulled this from also mentioned that just finding 75 SNPs, which is a pair of single nucleotide polymorphisms, the building blocks of DNA, if you can find just 75 of those and the right ones, you can uniquely identify any human being on Earth, which I think is a pretty interesting fact. And that's 75 among 10 million different SNPs in the average human genome. And the data source we took for this specific project was from this paper. Now, the goal of this paper was from some researchers in Australia that were looking at how standard machine learning models were compared to deep learning models on predicting features of an organism based on its genomic data. So they found that a lot of tree-based models can outperform deep learning models. But in this case, we just wanted to get access to this data. And as we work towards human healthcare and genomic data, we're starting right now with soybeans, hence starting with this research paper and contacting the researchers, getting access to their data, and then starting to look into the genomics data format. What you see here are specific plants, in this case, organized by column, and then specific locations in the genome are the rows here. And at the bottom is the value we're trying to predict. So in this case, you're looking at the genomes of individual soybean plants, and we're predicting the seed oil percentage. So if you took the seeds from these plants and smashed them, how much of the weight of that seed is made up from the oil that comes out of it. So in this case, this is a continuous variable. We also have a couple of categorical variables. But the next thing I want to talk about is the overall project architecture. Oh, sorry, one last thing to mention here. So because there are so many different rows that show the different locations within the genome, the really interesting parts are where those vary from the predictions. You can see in the lower left cell here, the prediction was that was a C cytosine, I believe, and the actual SNP that came out of that was a different characterization or different nucleotide. So by finding those, you'll be able to get more interesting predictions on the qualities of the plant in this case. So the overall project architecture, some of the libraries we're using as part of this research, these are convolutional neural networks that we're building with PyTorch. We're using Opacus, which is a library that enables differentially private stochastic gradient descent. So if you're not familiar with that, that basically allows you to apply differential privacy at the training level of the model. We're doing that on the clients in this federated learning architecture. And for that part of the overall structure, we're using the open source federated learning library Flower, and we're just using the standard federated averaging algorithm. So getting a centralized model that goes out to the clients, gets the weight updates from those training processes, and then averages those back on the centralized server. And in this case, we have 3 different versions of this architecture. So we have regular CNNs, so no privacy protections whatsoever. And then we have 2 versions of these CNNs with differential privacy, or DPSGD. And we have a high privacy and a low privacy variant. So like I mentioned, we're adding DP at the client level. PPFL has lots of different variations. You can add DP at the server level. You can also do secure aggregation, a couple other different ways you can incorporate privacy into a federated learning setup. We may end up doing some of those in future iterations of this project. And this is the trust model. So you'll find on the left here that we've got our clients being updated throughout the training process. They're sharing those weight updates with the central model. And finally, at the end of this process, we create and share a centralized final model that will be the output of some future healthcare research project that you can imagine. So this is the thing that we are starting to attack with privacy red teaming challenges. So what are some of the questions we're posing for this challenge? The first one is, are the non-private CNNs actually vulnerable to membership inference attacks? And that's the type of attack we're starting with, and we'll move on to others as time goes on. Can differential privacy help protect client data? And can it help if the epsilon is so large that the added noise doesn't impact the overall utility? So we're really trying to get the full breadth of no protections to high protections with this project. And the other part of that is, because this is a federated learning setup, the data distributions within the different clients might vary, and they do. So does the effectiveness of DP differ for those different clients? For example, if someone's conducting this red teaming attack, can they get re-identify a lot of members of one client's data set, but not so many of another's? And what do those variations look like? And because this project involves soybeans at this stage before we start building up and closer to human data subjects, we're calling this red teaming exercise, Don't Spill the Beans. So we're testing these different privacy architectures that I mentioned before. And phase 1 is a membership inference attack. If I'm given a record of a soybean plant in this case, can I tell which client, if any, that soybean was a member of that training data from? And this includes a lot of different tasks that are predicting some of the labels, including the categorical and continuous values. So this is one of the features we're predicting right now. So this is the seed coat color. You can see there's 4 values, very unbalanced. And again, when you break that out into different clients, you might have some clients that are more balanced and some that are more unbalanced. And then participants, which is open to anybody, don't have to be a privacy expert or researcher. You can work as a team. So we're providing you with a mix of relevant data, so that's mimicking the training data, and then outside data that might imitate what you get from, say, a hack or a security incident or a purchase from a data broker. And this is the problem design. So in this case, participants register. You can submit up to 3 different sets of predictions. You can also submit anonymously as an option. And then eventually, for these different phases, we're showing the leaderboard for the best performing models and teams. And this is the phase 1 results. So this is from the membership inference attacks. So you can see here that most teams manage to re-identify about 20 or 30% of the records, even for the DP-based models. which is really fascinating. It's exactly the type of result we're looking for. Can people break privacy in interesting ways? And just to kind of dig into some of these results a little bit more, this is the total percent correct that different members got based on the 3 different model setups. So going from the no privacy CNNs up over to the high privacy CNNs. I think the interesting takeaway here and in the next slide is that privacy is better than no privacy. It's not perfect, but it does have an impact. And this chart is showing the best result. It's jittered a little bit, so you'll see that they don't exactly line up, but the general idea here is that the y equals x axis shows where the predictions were correct and everything else that's blue was not correct. And again, you can see here in the right that the high privacy model had a lot fewer accurate predictions than the low privacy and no privacy models. So again, the takeaways are that there's uncertainty even in the most powerful attack on the most vulnerable model, and adding DP increases that uncertainty significantly. So as part of this, we also wanted to show just an example of the strategy from one specific team. So this was the strategy that the MITRE PPFL team implemented. So the expert on this team was a genomicist, and she theorized that the soybeans might have similar genomes by region. So if you had a bunch of soybean plants from Brazil, they might look genetically different than a bunch of soybean plants from the Philippines, for example. And that team then used PCA, principal component analysis, to reduce the dimensionality. This is, like I said, there's thousands of observations per organism. So they use this to reduce the dimensionality, make the training process easier, and then use a tool called PyCaret, which is a workflow and model management tool to compare the performance of multiple classifiers. So they just trained dozens of different models and then picked the best one at the end of the whole process, and trained it on all of the data, not only the relevant data they were given that mimicked the original training data, but also the external data that mimicked something you might get from a data broker, for example. And they came out in second place with this approach. So I illustrate this just as a use case and hope that some folks here might be interested in participating in future versions of the red teaming exercise. And with that in mind, let's talk about some of the future goals for this project. So as I mentioned, we're doing soybean data for our processes right now. Eventually, we want to move into cancer data, starting with animals next, and then eventually human subjects. The end goal for this entire project is to help researchers working on rare pediatric cancers. So these cancers, by their nature, are very small population groups. They're small even within individual countries. If we could build a PPFL system that could enable cancer research across borders and between institutions, we could better understand how machine learning and federated learning impact privacy. What are the advantages of different privacy settings? We could create more impactful healthcare research, and we could have better health outcomes and privacy protections, not only for individuals, but also for their families and their relatives. So I hope you'll join us in this red teaming challenge. This is a QR code to a website we've set up for this experiment. Right now, we're just kicking off our phase 2 challenge, which is a more difficult, but also still fascinating reconstruction attacks. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge some of the other people involved in this project and take any questions. Thank you.